Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from WILDY, Simmonds and Hill Publishing. It's called A Victorian Tragedy, this book here, and it's the extraordinary case of Banks and Goodfellow. Banks versus Goodfellow, we say Banks and Goodfellow, but you get the drift. It's written by Martyn Frost, and Elizabeth and I talked about the book, and we've given it for our book review title the following, and that is the issue of testamentary capacity meticulously defined by this landmark decision from 1870. Let's look at the book anyway. It's a hardback. There it is. And then there's the spine, if you can just make it out. And then there's some stuff on the back. Basically, it's a copy of a legal document. There's the editor, the author. You can see him on the back dust cover. On the front, you've got that blurb there about the book itself, which I'm not going to spoil too much of it for you. There is an index. References are to page numbers in the index, and then you've got some notes and various other things at the back. You've also got at the front, there's the front page. Again, another copy of the front page as I just get the book up so you can see it. Then you can see the blurb from the publisher. That's the dedication, which I'll just leave you to read. You can see that. It's always important to look at the dedication because a lot of people are involved in producing these books. And, there's a lot of work involved. There are 8 chapters and 3 appendices. You can see them. It sets out who was John Banks the Elder, and it sets out the history of the book. The introduction is always worth reading because it actually sets the scene quite nicely. That was written in February 2018. Then we get into the work itself. It's a book you can read through. What you have got are no footnotes. You've got some subheads, and then right at the back you've got the notes at the back, basically to back up some of the points that have been made. It's a very learned work, I thought, and one that was well worth reviewing. So what do we say? Well, we say this. Few will know of the decision in 1870 of Banks and Goodfellow. So we're delighted to read this detailed and brilliantly researched book from Martyn Frost, which is called A Victorian Tragedy. It's not often that we see books of this calibre devoted specifically to one case law authority and its longer term ramifications, so thank you. We believe that it's for the first time that this title describes how the landmark court case of Banks versus Goodfellow, or Banks and Goodfellow, in 1870 arose. From a human interest perspective, then, we are told what happened to the protagonists and how what is seen as an enlightened judgment provided a practical definition of testamentary capacity that has been used throughout the common law world since, because that's the basis of the authority. But what I liked about this book is the fact that you've got the personalities involved in this, because in the law of tort you certainly get that, but it's nice to see it in a sort of wider content area, covering different types of litigation. And it's a truly fascinating story because it's set against the backdrop of mid-Victorian the mid-Victorian world and how it affected the lives of those caught up in the case. And we hope, of course, there'll be more books devoted to this type of format in the future for both legal and general interest readers. Because one of the nice things about the WILDY publications is that they actually have very great applicability to the general readership, as well as to, obviously, lawyers like myself. Now, for the background, the story is set in the Lake District near Keswick. The issue to be determined was the mental illness of the testator, John Banks, and how he coped with living in a world that often derided his paranoia. Quote, "From the appearance of the man, anyone would take him for a person out of his mind," as one local clergyman put it. Sadly, in society you do have people who are a little bit like that. There are all sorts of tags from eccentric or whatever, but they do exist. And that's, of course, where we have to start looking carefully at what's happened. Now, the lives of John's relatives were scarred and often ended early by other illnesses common at that time. But these lives also interweave with 19th century issues of emigration, marriage reform, and early mortality. Remember, of course, the age for people to die at the turn of the 19th, 20th century was actually quite low. obviously because they were doing a lot of manual work, and of course the levels of mortality were different because a lot of children died very young, of course. Now the author, Martyn Frost, makes extensive use of original court papers and contemporary newspaper reports, both from the national and the local press, to present the picture that was placed before the court of how John Banks was affected by his insane delusions. And of course, of interest, I think, to many people would be the conduct of the assize court hearing, which is of course well explained. People probably won't remember. I actually attended assizes, so I'm that old, before we had the Crown Courts, but it's interesting to get some idea of the history of it, because it's very well explained here, together with how the court and the jury dealt with the radically opposed evidence from the either side of the argument. And Frost reviews this case in the sort of detail which has not been previously dealt with before, and it offers a different approach to re-evaluate an important case in the context of its time and the treatment of the insane in the 19th century. There were a number of cases, I'm sure you will recall from your legal studies, of this area of law, both in criminal law and elsewhere, and I think this book is a useful one. So let me conclude by saying that while a Victorian Tragedy book, as a book, will undoubtedly appeal to lawyers, we consider that the book's description of a mid-Victorian family and the treatment of the insane will also be of interest to a general readership. And that's, of course, very much part of what WILDY are doing. They're actually bringing legal stuff to a much more general readership, and I thank them very much for doing that. The book was published on the 31st of July 2018, and we'll just have a little look at it again. This is the book here, hardback. There you've got the spine. I don't think you can see that very well. Then you can see a little bit of the actual document itself. Let me open the book in the middle. We're looking the trials of the will. There we go. You can see the detail, how the book is set out there, the various points that are being given. In fact, it's talking there about the lawyer involved in the case, calling evidence, addresses to the jury and so forth. And of course, one of the things you will all be aware of is that the disagreement over wills probably brings out the very worst in people. I've certainly found that with the cases I've done in the past. It brings out very bad characteristics of the parties involved, and this is no different. But I'm very grateful to WILDY, Simmonds and Hill for producing this work, and for the huge amount of effort that Martyn Frost has put into it. Big thank you to all concerned. Enjoy reading the book. Bye-bye.